this is really my last question, and the reason I want to keep it here is I recently have been trying, I'd say recently in the past 6 months or so, just like almost naively revisiting these fundamental philosophical questions like, what is the good life? Aristotle, like kind of really Plato trying to get through these works. Um, and and of course, religion is a part of this. So a bit of a story here. Sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded, but I was having a conversation with my partner. My partner is not religious at all. In fact, she gets annoyed whenever I mention religion. And then I was kind of trying to outline some of your work, Peter, and of course, Matt, your work. I'm trying to like show that, like for her, I think her religion's really the religion of like growing up in a church, that sort of confessional Christianity. So she sees, I'm like, no, there are other ways to work through religion. And then, like, for instance, as you mentioned, Peter, for you, God might be a signifier for lack. And then perhaps for you, Matt, if I might say, God is a signifier for creativity. And then one thing she mentioned, which I think is a good point, I kind of agree with her, is like, yeah, I mean, why even use the religious language? Why even have God? Like, doesn't God overcomplicate things here? So I mean, I have my own way of answering that, but I'm curious to hear if someone like that really like let's say hard-nosed Richard Dawkins type atheist comes and says, yeah, why even put the word signifier of God or Jesus or whatever you may call it, and just speak of the thing as the thing without putting this other, let's call it superfluous signifier. How would you both respond to that sort of let's say critique?
I'm sympathetic to that critique. You use a word like God, and it will be understood in a whole variety of different ways by different people. And I also don't believe in the God that Richard Dawkins doesn't believe in. So I think it's a problematic term, and yet sometimes you just have to dive in there and activate um, all of that cultural history and all of the contemporary controversy. Um, so you throw out a word like that to signify that you want to get into that stuff. And if there ever was a word that's difficult to define, I mean, I don't know how many people who, especially who haven't cracked open any of Whitehead's books, will understand a word of what I was trying to say earlier about the primordial, the consequent nature, and all of this. Um, and so I'm sympathetic to the critique of the use of such language when we don't mean uh, this, as process theologians say, we don't mean the traditional omnipotent creator God. Um, and yet at the same time, I wouldn't want to so sever my connection to that whole lineage with there's something hubristic in thinking, oh well, we could just start over and I'll invent a new language and won't have to deal with all that baggage. It's sometimes I feel it's actually more. It's not just a strategic move, but I'm actually able to communicate more effectively by using the word, but saying, oh, okay, this God, we've been imagining God as a creator, but what if God is more like the relator, not the creator? Like, in other words, the condition for relationship. Um, then all of a sudden, like you still have the resonance with this older concept of God, but you're twisting it, you're transforming it. And so there's continuity, but there's also a difference. And I feel like that can still be powerful. And if we throw out the word entirely, then sometimes I'm not sure um, that we're still able to address the depths of human experience in the right way. And there may be other languages that allow us to get to that level of depth. Um, but the G word is such an effective uh, stick of dynamite sometimes that I'm hesitant to totally do without it.
Yeah, for me, and this is where, I think both Matt and I, in different ways, find this signifier to be vitally important, right? So, and I'll say why I think it is. Is it for me? So, right at the beginning, say the signifier God with Anselm, and you see it in Suda and Acacia Scattered, but almost God is a signifier that names something that cannot be signified. So already it's like the zero. It's when mathematics created zero, they had a symbol for nothing. And in fact, supposedly that was very controversial. Some people thought it was the devil's number, right? Because, God is everything. What is sin? What is devil? Lack. The kind of the privation. So the devil's number is zero because you're naming privation, you're naming nothing. Um, but in a way, God was this signifier that signifies that which cannot be signified. Say Anselm built a whole, ontological argument that, uses this, but that if you can conceive if I can conceive of God, then I can conceive of something greater than God, which is namely, I can conceive that there is something I cannot conceive, right? And you can't conceive of something greater than God, so therefore God must be greater than conception, right? And that's just, so already you have this signifier. So what, in psychoanalysis is called a master signifier. Um, for me, religion at its best has always been about negation, right? Then signifying something that can be signified. This is vitally important. Uh, for me, God, and this is why Christianity is very vitally important to me, is uh, the crucified God, the dead God, means also that this negativity is not simply because God is beyond all understanding, but this negativity is in the heart of the absolute, which is a mythological way of saying that lack is woven into everything. So the crucified God image for me is the privileged way of describing the non-oneness of the universe with itself. And I think in terms of the modern world, in biology, this was evolution, the non-oneness of the organism, which creates, biological complexity. In mathematics, Gödel's incompleteness theory, the kind of contradiction within mathematics that kind of allows for the mathematical system. In politics, democracy, the non-oneness of the political body with itself that creates civilization. In physics, kind of, wave particle duality, superpositioning, the non-oneness of physical reality with itself. In psychoanalysis, the unconscious, not as a substantive thing, but rather as the non-oneness of subjectivity with itself or of consciousness with itself. So the subject is not a thing. The subject is the eruption of the non-oneness of consciousness, right? But all of those for me are subspecies of the crucified Christ. Um, and what you get in the Apostle Paul is in a cultic way, he goes like, there's something significant about the idea of an alienated God, of a crucified God. There's something salvatory about that. Then Luther raises it to the dignity of theology. Then Hegel to the dignity of philosophy. Then Nietzsche to an existential salvatory event. And then Freud and Lacan, I think, create the technology of the death of God, right? That's my genealogy in a nutshell. I think I've shared that before in your podcast. But uh, so in a world of pure positivity, seize the day, be all that you can be, maximize all of that. The idea that of a pure negativity of a nothing is as scandalous now as it ever was. And for me, as I said, like theology says God exists, atheism says God does not exist. But this idea, Simone Weil talks about God as the name of the inexistent thing. I think that we have to have a way, not only a name for this negativity, we need a liturgy of negativity. So more important than God, I'm arguing for God here, but hey, I'll argue for the church, even more important, right? Which is a liturgy that through music and comedy and art and ritual and spoken word and storytelling in this liturgical space, you encounter lack, privation, unknowing in the art. You introject that. And through the liturgy, you're able to embrace this negativity and live into the world, right? These are not just things that I think are important. I've dedicated my life to God and the church, in the Church of the Contradiction and this signifier God, because I think they're absolutely vital. I think that when we lose the negativity, um, it's disastrous. Now you can't lose it. I mean, that sounds silly because you can't lose it. For me, it's everywhere all the time happening. But when you cover over it with a blanket of belief, with a blanket of ideology, you end up with incredibly destructive societies and worlds. So I'm not only advocating for God as the name for the non-at-oneness of everything with itself, uh, Christ as identifying with that non-at-oneness within yourself, but liturgy as playing out in a scene, like in a perverse sadomasochistic scene or whatever, where you create a scene where you play something out. The Church of the Contradiction creates a scene in which you play out the opposite of the perverse fantasy, the sadomasochistic fantasy, where the other is complete, right? The fetish is the object that makes you think the other is complete. But this is a non-fetishistic scene in which you encounter the radical negativity of everything so that you discover that nothing lives, in a sense that lack exists, nothing binds. What unifies us all, what joins us, the social bond, is that we all have lack and nothing saves, that there's an emancipatory dimension to this encounter with radical asymmetry.
Mm.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Peter, if you recall, you had a conversation with Cadell on his, on Philosophy Portal, and like one thing I even commented on the video saying that, I mean, I see this in both of your works really. It's this notion of an immanent critique. So like, and that's more effective, like the way Hegel does with metaphysics. You don't start with really any presuppositions, except you go into the system and critique it from within. And
Yeah.
I think that's where there can be genuinely something new that can come out of it, because like, of course, which is why, as you pointed out, Matt, yeah, the interest in new atheism, it's really, I mean, I don't even know if the movement exists anymore in any proper way. And I think one reason.
Cadell has a great analysis of that, by the way. Have you heard Cadell talk about this? Sorry for interrupting,
Mhm.
but
Oh
he
no,
says
I
like in he the Hegel's phenomenology, Hegel in the second part goes from reason to spirit to religion to absolute spirit to absolute knowledge. And he says that it's interesting because when the new atheists were there, like that was reason, that was like, Dawkins, there was a real thing. And so we'll take Dawkins as the paradigm of reason. And then Sam Harris gets spiritual. And so you see Harris and Dawkins arguing, and they can't understand each other. And Dawkins like, what are you talking about? So Harris, so out of new atheism comes spirituality. Nobody saw that coming. And then out of that, then you see Harris and Peterson talk. And Harris is like, I don't understand what you're doing, Peterson, as this transition to religion. And what the transition that hasn't happened is to absolute knowledge, right? That's it. But I thought whenever Cadell did an analysis of from Dawkins to Harris to Peterson, I did go, that honestly was hard to see. I like to try to think that I'm good at that kind of stuff, but I didn't think new atheism would the dark internet, the dark web and all that would, you know, go into a form of spirituality a la Harris and then a form of Jungian religiosity a la Peterson. Very interesting. Sorry. Anyway, back to you,
No, I mean,
Raoul.
this was the point. Thank you, Peter. That was the point I was trying to make. I mean, the problem is, of course, the radicality of Hegel, for me at least, in my own, naive reading, is that it's that leap to absolute knowing. That's like that, because that's where you almost have this subjective restitution, right? I mean, beautiful soul and then absolute knowing. So yeah. Now, gentlemen, this has been
That's where I
lovely.
would put Zizek, by the way, because Zizek debated Peterson, and
And
Peterson didn't
yes,
have a clue what Zizek was doing. So, like, yeah, I would just add Zizek as the example of absolute knowledge.
yeah,
And when Peterson was talking to Zizek, Peterson had no idea.
yeah, 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 yeah.